This is an abandoned station 60 feet under London. This train line stretches 6.5 miles across the city, and it was the first of its kind. But it wasn't part of the London Underground. In fact, it was never designed for people at all. It had just one purpose: to move mail across London as quickly as possible. Today, countless delivery services are competing to be the fastest in the industry, and it turns out things weren't so different at the start of the 20th century. This railway didn't just help to deliver mail within London, but across the whole world. Then in 2003, when the amount of post being sent was at its highest, the whole network suddenly shut down and was abandoned. Overnight, this railway went from delivering 4 million items a day to 0. This secret underground is now just a time capsule from 2003. So if it was so important, then why was it just left to be forgotten? The Post Office Railway opened in 1927, and it was way ahead of its time. It was the first driverless electric underground system in the world. In fact, it was actually designed earlier than that in 1912. So one of the first questions I had was, how did the post office of all institutions have the innovation and resources to build this? Well, 120 years ago, communication looked very different. Say you wanted to text your buddy about how great the ballroom dance was on Friday night, and next time he's in town you should both go visit because the music is just on point. You'd have to write a letter and post it, and if you lived in Bristol and your friend lived up in the north in Manchester, that letter would be shipped off on a train to London where the major sorting offices were, and it would then have to be sorted and moved across the city to another depot that would then put it on another train going north to a local post office in Manchester before it would be delivered by a postman to your friend's letterbox. And then if it was down for the dance, you'd have to write back and the process would happen all over again. Sounds like a lot of faff, but because the rail network across the country was so extensive, the delivery time was pretty decent. It could take just a couple of days. And from 1839, you could send a letter anywhere within the UK for just a penny. So it was affordable and everybody was doing it. Look at this influx of how much mail was sent from 1839 up until the turn of the century. This was a hugely important operation and businesses were relying on it. Speed was everything. The main postal service in the UK is Royal Mail. It was founded by Henry VIII in 1516. And at this point in time, it was a government-run public service. And they'd built out this pretty impressive distribution network, but the big choke point in the process is right here. London is the central hub, and getting post through the city streets is a nightmare. The city is covered in smog, making visibility awful, and congestion is a big problem. Cars are slow, and there is still a lot of horse-drawn carriages. And the roads are just not designed for cars. We've made an entire video on that, which I'll link at the end. So moving this much mail across the city by vans just isn't working out. But Royal Mail have been trying to solve this problem since the mid-19th century. They experimented with pneumatic tubes, using compressed air to propel mail capsules through these underground tubes. As cool as it sounds, it never really went anywhere, so it was scrapped. But in 1911, a governmental committee recommends building something like this, an electronic railway that would run 70 feet under London and connect the east and the west with stations situated across the route at all major sorting offices. A few years later, the plan is approved, and by 1917, the 6.5-mile long tunnel has been completed. But Europe is now at war, and the price of materials has skyrocketed. The government wouldn't allow the post office to continue work on the railway during wartime, and the project was put on hold until 1923. This is an old Royal Mail map of the railway from 1937, and this is the central sorting office, Mount Pleasant. According to Google Maps, there is a museum next door, so I figured that the station might still be accessible somehow. So I reached out to them to see if they'd be willing to do an interview and maybe tell me if it's still possible to access the network. It was a long shot, but they responded and told me to come down and visit their museum dedicated to the mail rail. That's what they call it now. So I went to meet Chris Taft, the head of collections, and I was pretty surprised when I arrived.
What I thought I was doing was coming to see the museum and
maybe go on this train. But that is not the case. That's not what we're doing. They gave me a high-vis jacket and a helmet because they told me we're actually going into the tunnels. We're gonna walk on the tracks and we're gonna go to these stations. Before we head down there, I just want to tell you about the sponsor of this video, Odoo, whose support helps make videos like this one possible. Odoo is an all-in-one management software that provides entrepreneurs with a range of applications to simplify their day-to-day management of their business. And the great thing is the first Odoo application is free for life with unlimited hosting and support. And they also offer a free personalized domain name for 1 year. Just make a note that once you have 2 or more standalone applications, you switch to the paid plan. But let me show you how simply you can build a website. The site builder is intuitive and easy to use. No technical skills are required. Beginners and advanced users will be able to find their way around. Look at this. Through 4 steps, you can get your new site into a good place by just defining your goals, picking a color scheme, then adding pages and features and choosing your theme. Then you can simply drag and drop blocks to start customizing it. You can then fill it with the photos, maybe add some text about them, whatever you like, and then reorganize the layout with this grid feature. And you can click the link in our description to try Odoo for yourself. So now let's jump back into exploring London's abandoned underground to find out what happened to this railway. I'm heading into the darkest part of the tunnel. This camera's not going to do it that much justice because it's really good in the dark, but maybe if I just change this. This is what it looks like to me. After about 10 minutes of walking through these tunnels, we arrived at an opening. This is Mount Pleasant Station that we saw on that old map. It's still here, and Chris told me that they've tried to leave it as close to how it was the day that it was left. During the First World War, when this project was put on hold, these empty tunnels were used to store art from the big collections like the National Gallery to protect them from the bombing raids above.
Here it is, a tube train especially for mail.
Eventually, the Post Office Railway opens, and it costs around £1.5 million to construct, and was a completely unique system.
Something that didn't exist anywhere else in the world that was dedicated just to the moving of post under the city streets.
Now, mail was able to flow across the city way quicker. What used to take a few hours by van was now reduced to just 30 minutes. The stations that you can see along this route are the mainline railway stations that take post to other parts of the country, and the major sorting offices where post continuously flows in and out of. Above ground, there are 2 chutes labelled eastbound and westbound. The bags of mail are put down the appropriate chute and slide onto this conveyor belt. Workers on the platform then look at the label on the bag with its destination, then put it into the appropriate container and push it onto the train.
At the same time, of course, the mail that was coming off the train was being sent back up to the office above. And these trains would have run at the peak of its operation for 22 hours a day.
About 18 trains are running on the network, and they arrive at the stations every 6 minutes. Each train can hold 4 containers, each container can hold an average of 15 bags of letters, and at its peak around 4 million items were delivered a day. As soon as the train is loaded, the platform worker dispatches the train.
They do that by pressing this button here,
which illuminates this red light indicating that the train is now under automatic control. As soon as the line is clear, the train will move on to the next station, where the process will happen all over again. And over the years, the railway became essential to keep this much mail moving at these high speeds. By the late 70s and early 80s, as business and commerce started to expand, the railway is hitting its peak of operation. And it's not just benefiting Londoners.
Probably carried more post for people in the rest of the country and around the world than it did, really strictly speaking, for people in London.
Despite being automated, it's a really high-pressured environment for these workers. Trains running 22 hours a day, mail being loaded and unloaded every 6 minutes, and there's rarely any interruptions to the service. As we continued to walk through the old tunnel, we came across what Chris calls the train graveyard. But this was an underground workshop where engineers would work on the trains to keep the system running at full capacity. But now it's silent down here, apart from the occasional sound of the Circle line rattling above. Today, it's still quicker to move across London underground, and although the way we communicate has moved far beyond sending letters, we still rely on the post office today. I literally have to send off this passport application today. I have to go to the post office to do that. Plus, delivery services have evolved and have become a huge part of modern life. And I could still see a ton of benefits for moving packages underneath London today. So what happened down here that led Royal Mail to abandon this network? As I looked closely around the station, I could see snapshots from the early 2000s. This dartboard was used by the workers to pass the time while the trains were travelling between stations, and the scores left here are from the last game before this station shut down.
Everything was switched off, the power was switched off, the network was switched down, and these platforms are pretty much left exactly as they were on that day. But the railway had started to decline in its use for quite some time before that.
The railway has now been operating for over 3 decades. In true to form, Royal Mail is looking at ways to improve its efficiency and speed. A weak link in the chain is the fact that each letter has to be individually sorted, and depending on the handwriting, reading the correct address can take longer than expected. So they automated this process, but machines also struggled to read these long addresses. So they figured it would be much easier to sort mail by applying a short, unique code to a location. And this is where postcodes come from. The US equivalent is zip codes. By 1974, Royal Mail has allocated postcodes to every part of the UK, so these machines can now easily sort through mail at a much faster rate.
For once in my life, I've got someone who needs me.
Whatever your company, remember that letters build business, because everyone responds to a letter.
Technology has continued to advance. The way people communicate is changing, and the now renamed Mailrail has passed its peak of operation, and some of the stations along the route are starting to close down. Yet the amount of mail being sent a year is still increasing. The machines sorting the post have drastically improved and removed a lot of people from the equation, meaning that they no longer need 6 sorting offices in London. At the same time, Royal Mail has been told they can no longer use the main London terminals for their overground trains. They instead have to build a new terminal in West London, making more of these stations redundant.
So by 2003, this railway was only serving 3 stations where once it was serving 8.
When the Mailrail was first built, a major feature was to link the sorting offices to the mainline railway stations. So by 2003, it was clear that the purpose had been lost and the cost of keeping the railway running was no longer viable. So in the year 2000, Royal Mail had changed from a government-run postal service to a state-owned company with a more corporate structure. But in its first year as a government-owned public limited company, it reported losses of £484 million. In this report by the London Assembly, which put forward a case to save the Mailrail, they stated, in the face of immediate pressures to reduce costs, and in the light of Mailrail's high cost compared to road transport, Royal Mail has decided to mothball the line at the end of May. They went on to make the case that this would result in an extra 80 van trips per week having to be made, and this would obviously have a more significant environmental impact, and encouraged Royal Mail to look at alternative uses for how it could be used to deliver goods. But the company had made up their minds. So on May 31st, 2003, the network shut down and it was just left to be forgotten. Above, Mount Pleasant is still in use, but on a much smaller scale. The Postal Museum was opened in 2017, where you can take a ride through these tunnels. For better or worse, we've come to expect that if we order something online, we should receive it almost immediately. I used to think that this was something that was born out of the rise of the internet. But down here, away from the busy streets where tens of thousands of packages are likely being delivered, walking through tunnels that were built over 100 years ago, designed for small automated postal trains, it was clear how far back this innovation actually goes. But to most people, they probably didn't know that this existed and how it shaped this industry. And I wondered what else might be hidden below our streets that has had such an impact on the way that we live our lives today. If you've got any suggestions, leave them in the comments and I'll look into finding them too.